Good afternoon. Thank you for coming to our session on our panel discussion on educating tomorrow's global leaders. What knowledge and skills do students need to be globally engaged citizens? I'm Paulo Zagalo-Melo. I'm Associate Provost for Global Century Education. And with me, I have 4 distinguished panelists. To my immediate right, your left, have Dr. Christopher Comer, Dean of the College of Humanities and Sciences. I have also Dr. Simona Stan. She's an Associate Professor of Business and the Director of our MBA program at the School of Business Administration. Then we have Peregrine Frissell. He's a GLI student and also participated in a study abroad experience recently. And to the end of the panel, we have Dr. Nicky Phear, and she's the coordinator of the Climate Change Studies program and the professor at the College of Forestry and Conservation. And on her behalf, I'm going to apologize because she'll have to leave a little bit earlier before we finish our session. She has a class to teach. But since we think that teaching will still be a part of the 21st century education after the conference, in fact, it might even be a part of the 22nd century education, we'll let you go earlier and go to your students. But thank you for being on the panel. I'd like to start by asking a couple of questions to each of our panelists. So it's kind of a twofold question, and you can we can answer each or just focus on the most important part of the question for you. And that is, how do we prepare students for the 21st century? How do we deliver a global education? How do we implement global learning at the at a university level? And in more specifically, how has each of you, how has been your experience in terms of delivering different kinds of components of global learning, and in Peregrine's case, in also being at the receiving end of these components of global learn experiences. And I would start with maybe Nicky.
All right, thank you. It's been a great day so far, and I appreciate being able to be up here. My most transformative moments in my own learning have actually been through studying abroad. When I was in college, I had a chance to study in Kenya for 3.5 months. And I would say also my most transformative moments in teaching has been leading students abroad. I get to bring students to Vietnam in the winter session. I've led that course 3 times. The focus of that course is on climate change. Vietnam is one of the countries of the world that's most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So it's a fitting place for us to bring students. So in terms of what is important, I was thinking about 3 things that I've benefited from and which I try to encourage in the programs I lead now. The first one is resilience. When I went to Kenya to study when I was in college, I went a week before the program started. I was studying wildlife management, and I traveled around by myself. To my brother's great advice, I went to the cheapest place I could find to stay. I went there, felt very insecure, broke down crying, wrote in my journal, "I need to be stronger, I am weak." And through the course of that week, I did learn to be comfortable being a minority in a country of Kenya, being around a different way of being. And by the time the rest of the students came, I felt like I had a foundation to stand on that allowed me to go deeper into my learning there in terms of the opportunities that allowed me to open my mind. And a couple of other things I think are really important, particularly around this issue of climate change, is global awareness and responsibility. So when we fly to Vietnam to study climate change, we emit 5 metric tons equivalent of CO2 in the flight there. Vietnamese, on average, emit 1/3 of that in their entire span of a year of living. So I feel like it's important, one, to understand the impacts that are happening in Vietnam from our shared impacts on the globe, how it's playing out in the context of Vietnamese culture, rapidly growing economy, and their government, communist government, capitalist economy. But then further, how do we take responsibility for that? So it's a really open-ended question. I think our university can help us think about how we take responsibility for that. Of course, there's measuring our carbon footprint, but I think it can be better embedded in our global education. The third thing is perspective taking. So, and this doesn't have to happen just globally, but I think a global experience helps us look at the world through a lens different than our own and see ourselves through a different lens. So I study a lot about developmental psychology, and as we develop as adults, we can move into increasingly understanding complexity. And this happens from first like a I-centered world to a we, it could be a very tribal-focused world, to a more world-centric world. And I think the kind of education we offer in the last session we had, I think it is really incumbent on the professors to help guide this increasing perspective awareness, because if a faculty member doesn't have an ability, that's really hard to open the students' eyes to this as well. So I will end that on those 3 things and pass it on. I don't know exactly what I was supposed to be talking about, but that's what I was thinking about running this session.
Chris, you want to talk about this?
So last night I sat down and thought to myself, what's my connection to this? And I realized I've been teaching study abroad courses for 12 years now, and I didn't do study abroad when I was a student, so my love of it has grown since I've been a faculty member. But from that I have a couple of observations, and I thought I'd start with 2 academics. We heard a lot about politicians, quotes from politicians this morning. We need to hear from the academy a little bit. A few of you may have read that long ago book, The Idea of a University by John Henry Newman. And in there he talks about the very idea of a university is so important because the concept and the name of a university are interlinked. And that is that behind the walls of a university, as we tended to view it, you had to have people from all over the planet. It made it universal, it made it a quality and complete education. And then roll forward from 1852, when that book was published in 1981, the novelist Robertson Davies from Canada, one of my favorites, and if you haven't read this book, Rebel Angels, it takes place on a campus largely. It's a great piece of fiction about universities. And in the middle of that, he says, you know, universities cannot be more universal than the people who teach and the people who learn within their walls. And the reason I like pairing those is because the term wall is in both of them. And we were still thinking about universities with walls around them as late as 1980. We have to knock down a lot of different walls, and some of them are really psychic. They're not physical at all, because we don't really have walls around universities anymore. That's almost a medieval thing. But the 2 things I want to talk about are the following. Is our current model for delivery. I have great fears about the model of delivery at UM, which is not that different from other places, because we've relied so much on a few departments, especially the languages, especially the language and culture courses, to get students overseas. And that's wonderful, that's important, they love it, they do a great job at it, but we can't let them carry the full burden. We have to help them out a little bit. That model, I would submit, is not sustainable. Those models here are built on experiences those fine faculty have had, in many cases for 20 and 30 years, building relationships with individuals in other countries so they could bring students there. And the world is moving much too fast that we can replicate that going forward. So we need to give them some help so that a new generation of such teachers can evolve out of our faculty. So what do we need to do? We need to market to our own faculty. We need to go and actually get our faculty and convince them that study abroad is feasible, it's exciting, and it's really important to their future and the future of their students. And I think our faculty will respond to that, but we can't just lay back and wait for them to get excited. We go after students and recruit them. We have to do internal marketing to our faculty to make that really happen. And we have to give them some stimulus to that. We have to give them some rewards based on responding to that marketing plea. Secondly, I want to point out that, you know, when students go and do study abroad, there was a slide this morning, and it had all these things employers were asked about. At the bottom, it was study abroad, and it said, you know, 51% want to see a study abroad experience, but above it was intensive writing experience, all these other things. Well, study abroad is not mutually exclusive with those. In fact, it typically includes those things. So think about a study abroad that rolls into it. Intensive writing, a senior experience, and all those sorts of things. It makes the students really powerful in terms of the job market when they get out. And I'm quite sure that the intent of the organization was not to make them mutually exclusive, but it almost looked like that. Interdisciplinary teaching is near and dear to my heart. I think interdisciplinarity is something that needs to be into study abroad. When you do interdisciplinary teaching, number one, it takes it off the backs of one person. It can be 2 faculty members. And the thing that happens when students get to a new site and they start to study abroad is they get into a defamiliarization. And that opens them up to all kinds of new possibilities. If you do interdisciplinary teaching, you have students from multiple backgrounds suddenly sitting in the same classroom talking at a level they've never talked before. They open up to other students. They can open up to other cultures. It's a time to really get them to look at different disciplines in a way they've never done it before that they wouldn't do if they were on their home campus. And so I would like to very much suggest that I heard this morning a little bit of the question of, you know, what kind of skills do we transmit? There was a lovely quote from our president about study abroad is not about transmitting skills. I want to verify that and say it's not. It's about an amazing experience. The skills come all by themselves. We have to put students in these amazing experiences. They will soak it up. I'm quite sure of that. The last thing I want to do is to sort of dovetail with what you said. I worry a little bit about our carbon footprint in the terms of doing study abroad, and so I just want to point out that we as a university are on the verge of opening up some new channels for global experiences that don't require our students to get on airplanes. And the thing I'm thinking of is a little self-centered here. It's about the new classrooms that are coming online in the Liberal Arts Building. The goal there is to make them enabled for two-way communications with folks around the planet. We expect there will be on the order of 10 such new classrooms. And the technology in those classrooms is supposed to make two-way communication with people at a distance seem as if they're sitting in the room with you. We're really changing the technology here. Matt's been working with us. We're taking it up a major notch. And we have to think about the fact that global education will happen in study abroad, as it should, but it's also going to happen directly on this campus as we get to know people through this virtual connection, which is going to become more and more important as we realize we want to keep our carbon footprint extremely modest. So I think we have to look at multiple domains for the globalization that we go about on campus here, and some of it is sitting right here in our classrooms if we just turn that up a notch.
Thank you, Chris. The word of the day has been perspective, so we're going to change perspective right now. We're going to go to Peregrine, who has the student's perspective on how the university is delivering a global education and what are the experiences that you feel have given you a global awareness, global perspective.
Thank you. I'm a senior studying journalism. I'm from Montana. Last spring, I got the chance to study abroad in Bangkok, Thailand for 5 months. And after that, I had a journalism internship in Nepal over the summer. I was writing for the Nepali Times. It was a weekly newspaper. I'm also a member of the Global Leadership and the Davidson Honors College, Global Leadership Initiative, and the Davidson Honors College here on campus. Studying abroad in Thailand was the hardest thing that I've ever done, certainly. But I think I hit a point in Nepal where I realized that what all this is about is not only being able to go somewhere and function and live, but to be able to go and use the skills that you got at your university to give back to the place that you find yourself in. I had a really hard time in Thailand, but Nepal was much better because I felt like I was able to use what I learned in the journalism school and in my freshman seminar on the Global Leadership Initiative and in all my classes to produce work that was meaningful for people in Nepal and people all around the world. I think that really put this whole thing in perspective for me. What's been a 3-year journey. Yeah, I think that a lot of the interactions before I left that were really helpful for me were being able to interact with students and professors that were from places that were different. The whole reason I was in Nepal is because I had a Nepali economics professor. I've participated in the Global Partners program, where you're paired with an international student who's here for the semester or maybe for 4 years, and you help them assimilate. I found those experiences really worthwhile and really helpful too. I think helped me learn how to deal with people. Obviously, they're different than myself, and working in journalism abroad, I became intensely aware of how important those experiences were. And I think that forming the last year of my education, especially aware that the reason that those ways that you can communicate are important is so that you can go somewhere and be productive. And I think that's how you see all this pay off in a 21st century society where people have been educated well. Yeah.
Thank you, Peregrine. And now we switch perspective again, and we'll hear from the director of our MBA program. Simona?
I'm very honored to be in the company of my colleagues, and so you know, I'm not as eloquent as they are because I'm an engineer transformed into a business person, and I have to bring it all down to, okay, so what is this actually all about? I'm also from Romania, and I think that that's a different perspective. It took me quite a bit of a travel to get here, and I ended up here after maybe 3 or 4 intermediate stops. And finding this place, we realized that this is our future and this is where we want to live our life. And obviously I have a very global perspective and I believe very much in global education. But from my perspective, looking at the average student, the average faculty member or staff member or the average community member in Montana, in Missoula, even in Missoula, I don't think that global education or global issues are very much something that they consider relevant or that they really lose sleep over. So my biggest challenge in the School of Business is to deal with the attitude component. So our keynote speaker talked about skills, knowledge, and attitude. And I think that what we really need to start is with the attitude, because then the knowledge and the skills come. And as I said, the biggest challenge is to educate students in a School of Business what's in it for them. Why should they really worry? Why is important when they go and interview for a job to say that they are comfortable, or at least they can function competently in a global environment? And that's hard, because it's not something that you teach in a class. And right now I'm having my 3rd year of challenge of recruiting students to take to Romania for a study abroad class. I believe very much that international business is not taught but experienced, and you learn how to operate in a global environment by being an active participant. We hear that all the time, right? You know, don't be an observer, don't be an active participant, but until you do it, you don't realize really how important it is. And every time it's so hard to recruit students, and after they do it, they say that this is the best thing that they've ever done, and they will tell everybody that this is the most important thing that they should do, go and experience another environment. But how do you communicate that? You know, when you have a group of students who have blank faces, and you try to tell them that they have to put all this money and this time, you know, that is an opportunity cost compared to everything else that they can do. So I would like to see more effort, and this is what my colleague Dean Comer said about how important it is what faculty do in educating students across the board, so that they think all the time, so what did I do to make myself a better global citizen? Why is that important for me at the end of the day? That's what I would like to see more effort. And I guess I could talk more, but let's move on.
Thank you, Simona. In the first round of answers, you've well focused very much on study abroad, and I was listening to Dr. Peterson at her keynote remarks just a while ago, and about the concern that universities must have about delivering a global education to all, when you know that you can expand and should expand study abroad for sure, but it will be very difficult to get that experience to all the students in the university. So let's imagine for a while that study abroad was not one of the components available to us for global education, global learning. Where would you focus? What would be the focus for a global learning? How do you develop global learning in the curriculum, and how do you turn it available to all the students, considering that study abroad will, even if being expanded and available to many, many students and funded, will not be an option that all of them can take?
There's one very obvious answer to me, and that is something we've always had, which is our language and culture courses, which always give an amazing perspective to students that when they leave the university, they're going to be able to work in a diverse world. That's one start. That's something we have to make sure we keep strong as we go forward. Even if the students never left the campus, if we have high quality language and culture education taking place in a diverse way, that's one way to do it. That's only a small part, but that's a very bedrock way to do it.
Well, I loved what Peregrine had to say about him getting exposed to the global world through meeting students that came to campus, and professors were from other countries, and I don't know what it was about your personal experience that led you to be open to that, but I remember meeting you as a freshman and being really impressed by that side of you, because many students don't take time to reach out to students from afar when they're here on campus. I was looking at the data. We have something like over 700 students, international students on campus today. And I think we can do a better job finding ways to integrate their perspectives into our classes. Since I've started teaching abroad, I now am more aware of the fact that we have students in my introductory climate change class from other countries, from Brazil, from Japan, from South Korea. And the very first day of class, I make everyone aware of the international diversity that we have in a class. And I find ways to draw on those different perspectives. In fact, now, today, what I'm leaving early for in my class is we're going to spend the next 3 classes doing a world climate simulation as a way to help students understand what's going on in the UN climate negotiations in Paris coming up. The students are going to be divided into groups to represent different developed and developing countries and put forward what they think their country could agree to in terms of reducing emissions and supporting mitigation and adaptation in developing countries. And so that's another way to bring global perspective into our classes, is through the exercises we do, making our international students visible. And then one other assignment I did with my Intro to Honors class is the first week, an assignment I had was for them to go and interview someone that they normally wouldn't talk to. And I suggested like an international student or someone who's quiet in your residence hall, and then write up what they learned from that person. So encouraging them, when they see someone different, that there's something new and interesting, compelling they can learn about that person.
I like to build on that, and definitely the best way to go is to leverage the experience and the diversity that international students bring on campus, but also international faculty. And I want to add that what I'm trying to encourage my students to do is to find the commonalities, the things that bring us together before they see the differences, the things that make us look different and push us apart. And I remember a moment of insight that I got in my life when I talked to a person from New Guinea and realized that the problems in the relationship with the mother-in-law are exactly the same across the world. And once you realize, that there are so many things that make us all humans the same, makes you feel more comfortable with other people from other cultures, and makes you value and be more motivated to discover and enjoy the differences much more. So looking at both the things that make us similar and the things that makes us different, by encouraging our students to talk to the exchange international students, that's a first step.
Peregrine, I know you mentioned global partners, which is a good example, but can you think of other experience that could be integrated in the curriculum in a way that all students would benefit from apart from study abroad?
Yeah, definitely. I think my experiences in my interdisciplinary classes were especially helpful when I went abroad. Because even when I was sitting in a political science class, I was constantly, I mean, no matter what I was studying, having to blend these different ideas in my head, trying to pay attention to what people around me were doing and how they were reacting to different things. And I found that the whole semester, as well as the summer, was a real blending of fields that had previously had different course numbers attached to them. And it was very helpful to have a little introduction and be okay with the idea of blending those ideas before I went. Yeah, aside from that, I think my experience with international students here in Missoula has been incredibly valuable, like I said earlier. Particularly in my classes that are open to international students, getting that perspective, like Nicky said, is really helpful. In my journalism classes, some have a lot of international students and others have not so many. And I find that they really, really benefit from having that extra perspective and being encouraged to speak up. And sometimes, now I know what it's like to be on the other side and not always feel comfortable speaking up too. But I think that they're also, making sure that there's a little bit of encouragement by the other students. When they do speak up, it adds a whole other facet to the class that I think really improves what students get out of it.
Just before we open the panel discussion to our audience, I'd like to add my 2 cents to this last round of answers by saying that the type of integration you were talking about, Peregrine, and I guess a little bit all of you, should start at orientation. Orientation should include that kind of activity where you have international students right on the first day being pushed into talking to US students and vice versa in activities, and we actually have separate orientations for students. That would be something that it's not exactly in the curriculum, but it is at a very important time. And I remember my orientations as an international student. It's a very important time. It's first few hours, days. You're kind of looking around, jet-lagged. You don't half the time you don't even know what time it is. And if you have activities that immediately connect, you with a 2, 3, 4 US students right there on your first day, and you spend that at least half day or 1 day or 2 days with different groups of domestic students. The same thing for our students to be with international students for a good part of orientation. I think that would make a huge difference. We have a mic right here in the center of the room, and I would welcome you to come up to the mic and ask your question to one or all the members of our panel. Do I see any hands in the air? Yes, please.
I have a question that came up when you were talking, Peregrine. You mentioned your experience in Bangkok. Thailand in particular is being more difficult, and that raised the question, I wonder if you could imagine, could we have prepared you better for that, or what was the nature of the difficulty? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Can you say your name and your area?
Sue Bradford, Missoula College and Davidson Honors College.
I think that I sort of alluded to it earlier, but one of the reasons that I experienced a lot of difficulty in Thailand was because I was used to being here and I think being really involved in a lot of things that I felt like were important. I think that's one of the great things about going to school here in Missoula is there was opportunity to get involved in so many different ways. I had a really hard time going to Bangkok and all of a sudden having nothing to do except class, and then obviously exploring the city, but not having people around that would notice if I wasn't there, was one of the things. I'm used to, if I'm 20 minutes late, there's like 30 people who are wondering what's going on. I think that, I've thought about that a bit, if there was anything that I could have done to be more, I think maybe being aware of that before I would have left might have helped. but it was something that, I think was alluded to in some of my study abroad prep classes, but I was a little bit unprepared for. I'm not entirely sure what the best way to do it. It was an important experience to have, too, because then by the time I got to Nepal, and it took me a little while to, I think, get over the rut and realize that I had to go out and establish those own relationships again. It was sort of like being a freshman again, except a bit more severe. And so, yeah.
I was fascinated when I heard about Peregrine's experience, and actually what I'm trying to do with my study abroad in Romania is to prepare students exactly for this situation. So we're arranging internships that are customized to the students' interests, and then we throw them in the middle of that environment. So a student would be in a bank, and another student would be in a manufacturing company, and so on. And at the end of their experience, the students said that actually the biggest challenge that they had was to figure out how to navigate the environment, being the only one who doesn't understand the local language. Everybody will speak English to them, that's not a problem, but on the other hand, they will speak Romanian behind them, and they would have to figure out how to navigate that environment and how to negotiate a goal for their project. They have to do a project and make a presentation at the end. And this is a very safe environment, so everybody loves them there, everybody helps them to succeed, so there is no way to fail. But the students found that that is hard, when you're the only one in that environment and you have to actually find a way to effectively communicate and do something with the local community. So immersing the students, I don't know how to do that on a large scale, but that's really what you had.
I think one of the questions has to do with the carbon footprint problem with study abroad, and another has to do with the money problem of study abroad. So we're looking for ways to make use of our resources here, which I've always wanted to do anyway, because I have taught humanities where an entire 1,000-year period is not taught. I think we could do something like study abroad by looking at other ways of thinking that are just out of the curriculum. I mean, who reads Thomas Aquinas anymore? We could go just within the Missoula area. We can go up and visit the Buddhists in Arlee. We can go visit the Native Americans. And I was joking with my friends over here, but we could go across town to the other political party and have a lot of the experience we get from these experiences. I'm not saying not study abroad. I lead study abroad. I'm on my 6th trip to Ireland. I think it's fabulous. But there are many, many other ways we could step outside of the fairly narrow range, actually, of university thought. There are right ways of thinking and wrong ways of thinking, and I actually am serious about a trip to the Middle Ages.
See your name and
Lori
college.
Pengelly Drake from the Honors College.
Thank you.
Just to make a comment on that, Lori, for a business student, taking a job in downtown LA is as much of an international experience as it gets.
Thanks for those comments. I wanted to follow up on your point about the employers and what they think about study abroad and what they don't fully understand about study abroad, because we have also been digging into those findings. I always get questions about that particular chart because it's the one at the bottom. Of course, it's really at the bottom of a bunch of things that they actually think are good. So it's the bottom of the top or something. But we've also done focus groups about this question because I've been very curious, knowing exactly the point that you make and believing that study abroad, all the research shows it, every single person you talk to who's ever done it says it's transformative, it builds all these capacities that otherwise the employers say they really want. So what's the problem? And so we've actually asked in focus groups about it to try to dig into, what are those other 49% who don't seem to think this is a plus? What are they thinking? And I think one of the problems is they, when they see on a resume, if you just write, I had a study abroad experience in Spain, and don't talk about what you learned there and what it was like, the default in the brains of the employers is sort of our worst version of study abroad. It's the one where you're not getting the experience that you described. And they think it's tourism, hanging out in bars with other international students, basically not working as hard. I mean, they think of the worst of it rather than what we really want it to be and what we try to do for it. So I do feel like there's something about helping students understand how to talk about what they've actually learned in those more substantive study abroad experiences, because it shocked me at first, but we had some pretty high-level business people say, oh yeah, when I see resumes and there's that, I spent a semester in France, it's a net negative, not a net positive. And I thought, oh my God, like how could that be? But it's how we talk about it and how we do it.
Yeah, it's a great point. I actually talk to the students in my courses about that quite a bit, and I often say to them very bluntly, I expect you to come to me for a letter of recommendation so I can explain the nature of this course. It is not fun and games. It's a very intense experience, and I want employers to know that if they got through this and they got a good grade in the course, they really got something out of it. So you're right. We have to be very careful how we talk about those things.
Nicky, you want to?
Yeah, it was actually one of the things that I was wanting to talk about. That seemed to be a tone early in the panel about that this experiences will speak for themselves. And I actually think we really need to structure the learning around how to help students think about what they're learning and how they talk about it. And beforehand, I do lessons on different cultural types so they're aware of those differences and some of the roots before they go. I schedule many reflection sessions, and I really give students a chance to, in their own words, frame what they're learning about it and what the takeaway is. And I have them think about how and work on how are you going to talk about this when you get home. Because I know they're going to be asked, and I want them to have practice while we're still there doing that. And the assignments are built towards that with their reflections, blog posts, question sets, so they have in multiple different forums an ability to talk about what they're learning and the relevance in kind of like an elevator speech way, because people aren't going to give them the time to really reflect on it and ramble, but to be able to say that concisely will set them up for success. Yeah.
Very similar, like when I teach a course, a regular course, I have the learning goals of the course, and at the end of the course I have to help the students figure out that they actually achieved the learning goals, and I help them actually be able to articulate what they learned from the class, so it's the same thing.
Thank you.
I want to maintain the positiveness of an international trip. Unfortunately, one of my former students had a very negative trip she's from Western Montana. She went to an institution out of the state of Montana. And she went to Guatemala. At the time, Guatemala was the number 3 country in the world involved in trafficking. She arrived at the airport at midnight carrying scuba gear and all kinds of things, just like neon light saying, Western girl who knows nothing about the culture. Fortunately, she was able to get to her place of residence safely that night. However, things went south very quickly. She was involved in a microbiology exploration. She was thrilled about the program. I was thrilled about the program. But she ended up being falsely accused of drugs and other things. Her roommate the father was a lawyer. He was spending his entire time keeping her out of the Guatemalan jails, knowing that if she went into those jails, she would never be seen again. So there was no supervision on this trip from this institution. I have tried to get her to write out this experience and actually send it to the State Department. She did not receive any help from the embassy. It was by a miracle that her folks were able to get her out of the country, literally. I mean, this would have been a movie. I mean, it sounds like, one of the Taken movies, but, she was literally getting on an airplane to come home when the cops were headed to her place of residence. So it was one of kind of the maximum worst situations you could get into. And I'm just wondering how the point of safety came up. Obviously not knowing anything about culture, no supervision. What would be some things that you guys could do to make sure that this kind of experience doesn't happen to anybody from the University of Montana?
I'm glad you you asked that question. And we cannot prevent that from happening. We can prepare students for negative experiences. They can be better prepared to handle those experiences. So in fact, we have been working very hard at the university level, not only international programs, but also legal counselor, risk management on implementing a travel registration and risk management plan, and to focus more on preparing the students when they go, especially when they go to areas under regions under a travel warning or regions where we know they might face some problems. So we do have that, and we even have a credit-bearing course on preparing for study abroad. So we do have all the instruments in place right now. The travel registration, when we stopped a group of students from going to a very dangerous area, this was 2 years ago, I guess, very dangerous area in Africa, and we were able to, by knowing about it in time, to actually find another country also in Africa where they could do the same kind of research without the same kind of danger. But if they decide to choose a study abroad trip without coming to our office, without letting us know, that's why the travel registration is so important. If they hire a private study abroad provider and we don't know about it, then there's very little we can do. Patty?
I can't agree more that study abroad is transformative for most students. We have some unfortunate incidents, but Peregrine, you're the poster person here of all the wonderful things that it does. But as you said yesterday, Paulo, 350 students at University of Montana study abroad. Of course we want that number to be larger. I'd love to see it more carefully integrated into programs of study. If we're talking about perspective building, the whole idea is, as I tried to say earlier, building that architecture. But I have a fundamental concern. How does the single mother of two who lives in Polson and is commuting to classes here at the university enter the world that we all know awaits her? Let's say she works for 3 Dog Down. I looked where those feathers are from. They're from all over the world. They're making things for all over the world. She's already part of the global economy if she's working part-time for 3 Dog Down. So my question is she going to be at one of those classrooms, I think it's very exciting, where you're going to be able to do the connected classrooms model for bringing the world to her? Is she going to be part of some new architecture in the curriculum that allows her, because those 2 kids, the part-time job, commuting from Polson, it ain't going to happen for her right now. We want it to, but it's not going to happen right. How do we reach her with more global perspective?
Chris?
Good time to leave. I think right now we'd be hard-pressed to help that person have a typical study abroad experience. Doesn't mean we can't give that person global experiences. One thing...
I'm not saying she should have a study abroad experience.
Right, I know that. So as you pointed out, one of the possibilities is that being in the classroom here, if that person can get here, we can globalize the curriculum. I mean, your point earlier this afternoon about if the curriculum really undergoes change and becomes more global, then by virtue of being a University of Montana student, they will have a deeper level of global experiences. One thing I would point out is, I have a lot of friends that work in the industry that supports study abroad. And one of the things all those companies are seeing is the demand is not for junior year abroad anymore, it's for short-term programs, very much so. And so the possibility, I mean, I raise money all the time for study abroad experiences, but the possibility of trying to raise a fund that would help non-traditional students be supported better when they went away for 2 or 3 weeks of that, you know, intense but very valuable experience is not unreasonable, but it won't happen if we just wish for it. We're going to have to actually plan for it. So that's a great question.
I would like to see a better use of technology. A lot of international businesses do a lot of work with virtual teams, with a lot of video conferencing left and right, and I don't know why we cannot have develop relationships with universities around the world where our students and their students work on projects online, I mean through video conference and everything else, and that's the next best thing to actually putting bodies on a plane and moving them around the world.
Yeah, I think I was very conscious that I'm very fortunate to have been able to study abroad, but one of the reasons I was able to do that was because of programs like the Global Leadership Initiative and the Davidson Honors College, that are programs that a lot of people on campus don't get to participate in. Yeah, and I think I had a point that I was going with that.
Actually, if I can follow up on what you just said about the Global Leadership Initiative and being a program that not every student participates in, how do we turn the global education curriculum into, you know, how can we turn experiences like Global Leadership Initiative into something available to all students, something that all students can take from their education at UM? Chris?
Resources. I mean, you know, I know we've been working very hard to raise the funds for that, and it's been successful, but you know, we just have to have a view towards its continuation and its expansion as much as we possibly can. And as somebody said here before, if you talk to anybody who had a study abroad experience or just any international experiences significantly in their life, they understand how transformative it is. And when they think about helping university, they're often extremely eager to help in things like global experiences for students. But we just, you know, that's the foundation. I don't know if anybody's here from the foundation, but we need to build that into prioritization for fundraising in a more profound way. Otherwise, you know, we'll never get there.
Peregrine, I thought you were preparing an answer there and I kind of interrupted you. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I couldn't come up with the...
Tweet it out later.
This is a comment following up on what some of you were saying earlier about having the students do more reflective work before and afterwards. Is there a way of extending that to where the 350 students that do get the opportunity to study abroad have some more systematic way of having an impact on the other 13,000 or so students who don't get to go, but who would still benefit from hearing about Peregrine's experience or the Irish class's experience or any of the other groups that have gone? You know, we have an undergraduate research forum every year. And that's a way for students who do research to have an impact on the rest of the student body. And maybe we could have an analogous symposium related to international travel. Those 350 all are required in some way to make a presentation or have interaction with the rest of the students in some systematic way.
If I can use my role as moderator to to also answer that question. One way, and I'm sure our panelists have other ideas, but one way that several universities are already implementing is to have the study abroad experience, to have study abroad experiences available in the freshman and sophomore years. Because the best advocates of study abroad are students who have studied abroad. If they do that in their junior year, in the second semester of their junior year, for instance, they'll have only their senior year to promote that experience. And it's not even, it's only 1 year, and it's not even the best year because it's probably the year when they're going to be busier. So some universities are pulling the opportunities they traditionally have for study abroad at the junior year to freshman and sophomore years, and you get the best advocates for study abroad for 2 or 3 years rather than just 1 or 2 semesters. But I'm sure our panelists have.
Actually, in that regard, when I first started teaching study abroad at another university, I was taken aside by the people in the study abroad office, and they said, "We just want one word of advice: don't take any freshmen." And I ignored that. And as long as they were interested, I took them. And I've never had a bad experience with a first-year student. They've loved it, and I think it's been great because it set a tempo for them. Many of them, by the way, have gone on to have a second international or global experience, and what a powerful thing that is to see. But Royce, in regard to your comment, I was thinking about the fact that, if we do have more classrooms where we can have immersive experiences long distance with folks in other countries, how cool would it be if students who, let's say, they spend some time in Beijing and then they come back here and they're employed as a teaching assistant in a course where students are going to be virtually engaging with folks in China, and then that student is a personal representative who can tell those personal stories about being there, and that peer connection, not just the person on the screen, but the student sitting next to you who's been there. That'd be a great way to loop them back in. It'd be great for them to share their experience, and great for the students who haven't been there. It'd be a nice model.
Even while they're there.
Yes, yes.
Come into a classroom while they're there. Peregrine, when he was in Thailand halfway through, have him on video to talk to the class here.
We have a scientist who's in Antarctica right now, and in a week or two, he's going to be virtually present in some biology classes to talk about his experiences in Antarctica.
Another way of raising awareness or interest for study abroad and for global curriculum in general, which is also a very important part of this discussion of global learning. As well mentioned before, you cannot just focus entirely on study abroad. One of the things I've been doing here in Missoula since I got here was to take a global competence program we had on campus and develop a K-12 branch for that global competence curriculum. And so we actually have a faculty member who works exclusively on delivering global competence not only to community organizations and campus, students, staff, faculty, but also to K-12 schools. And to see how thirsty these schools were for this kind of curriculum, we started with 70 seminars, so about roughly 70 hours of global competence seminars to 4 K-12 schools in Missoula. And this was in the first semester of the program. In the following academic year, in 2 semesters, we did about 360 in 11 schools, 360 global competence seminars. So this is I call it the long-term investment on global education, because these are the students who will hopefully knock on our door in a few years and ask, so what do you have in terms of global education in your curriculum? And I might be interested in actually looking at study abroad as well, because I've been hearing about these different languages, and I've been meeting international students since I was in 3rd grade here in Missoula. And so that's the long-term investment that's going to start paying off in, 5 to 10 years, in full force in 20 if we keep going at the same rate. So long-term is great, but it takes a lot of time and patience. Well, if we don't have more questions, then I'd just like to ask you to join me in thanking our panelists.